Hi, this is David from Media Cybernetics, and in this short video I will show you how we can classify objects um, according to intensities of various colors. So in this case what we have is we have nuclei in blue, and we're interested in finding out how many of those cells have red staining and how many of those cells have green staining. The simplest way to do this is to simply count the blue nuclei and measure their red or green intensities. So to do this, we're going to go to the count size ribbon, and in the count size ribbon click the manual option for segmentation. This should open the segmentation tool on the right. Now, the default segmentation option is to analyze the image based on the average red, green, blue intensities, essentially as a monochromatic interpretation. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to switch to using an RGB interpretation where we can set different segmentations for different channels. And what we're specifically looking into doing here is just counting the blue nuclei. So we're going to switch to the blue channel, and we can start by just finding the bright objects, and we can manually adjust the threshold until we're happy with it. Because the objects are blue and the overlay is also blue, just to make it a little bit easy to see, I'm going to change the color to yellow just so it's a bit more obvious. Now, as you can see, many of the objects appear to be touching. So one of the things I'm going to do here is I'm going to change the options for the split to automatically split the objects with count, which will mean that when we actually count these objects, it should do a better job of identifying single objects. It won't be perfect, but it'll be a lot better than having one big clump. This split can be done either on a watershed, which will look for lines of dimming intensities when objects are almost overlapping, or it can be done on boundary shape, in which case we're looking for essentially H-shaped objects. So we're looking for minimums in the width of the object that aren't either of the endpoints. I'm going to use the boundary shape in this case, but do try either option that work for you. So once we're ready, we've got the threshold and we've got our split options. We can hit the count button and you see it's counted all our objects. Now what we're interested in is we're interested in measuring the red and green intensities. So under the types menu here, we can scroll down the list and you will find here we have the intensity measurement and we have intensity red and intensity green, and you just double click on them to add them to the selection. So now each one of these objects has a red, a green intensity, and you can see this object here, for example, has a very high red intensity but very low green intensity. So we could essentially say that this object is red, likewise with this one. But if we look at this object here instead, you see that it's the opposite, and it's got a very low red intensity but a very high green intensity. Now there's several things we can do with this. One thing we could do is we could use a learning classification, where we're going to say I'm interested specifically in the red and green measurement, and we can add multiple classes. So if I add a class, and we could call this double negative, for example, and I'm going to then select a couple of objects that I think are negatives. So I can control click on a couple of them that are representative of what I'm looking for and click OK. For doing this, it might be useful to actually zoom in on a picture, and then we can add a second class, and we can say call this one green positive. And again, same thing, we're going to look at our image and select objects that we think are green positive. And finally, we can add our third class for red positive, and again select a couple of objects that we think are positive. Okay, now when I click OK, it should automatically classify all of these objects, and what we should see is highlighted in green on the image are all the objects that have green staining, highlighted in red all the objects that are red, and highlighted in blue the objects that don't have any of these alternative stainings around them. If we want to, we can look at the groupings. So in the measurements data table we have the groupings button, and we can classify put them by class. And you can see here that I have 109 double negatives, 160 objects that are green positive, and 54 that are red positive. Obviously, this count is not perfect. One thing you'll see is that we have lots of very small objects that maybe shouldn't be counted. So one of the things is when we did the count originally, there was an option to filter objects based on their sizes. So we could eliminate objects that are too small to be truly reliably counted. If we select the option when we edit range to apply on close, you should see now we have much fewer objects. We can go back to our learning classification and reclassify those. Another thing is I realized now that I've forgotten to add a class for double positive, so I could have another class now for double positive. And again, same thing, we can then select cells that have a bit of both. Okay, once we're happy with this classification, where we can export the data here, another thing we can do is we have this tool called the data collector, which is under the measure ribbon, in which we can select the red and green intensities and collect all of the objects. The reason I'm doing this is that here in data collector we have the option of doing a scatter plot. So if we look at this here, we can see that there's quite a few objects with that are only green. Or only red. There's a few that most of the objects that are green have some level of red, and it's just a nice graphical way of representing this. Now the problem we might have is you might have, for example, staining around the edge of the nuclei and none inside the nuclei. And one thing you could do is you could extract the various colored channels. And if you fear that some of these channels have a slight donut shape, especially for the staining, then you could take, for example, the green staining here, and under the process ribbon we have filters. And in the morphological filters, we have filters called dilate. And what the dilate filter will do is it'll expand the boundaries of the object. And it should mean that if the object is donut shaped, it would fill in to some extent the hole in the center of the object, and then we can use recombine all these images to analyze them as before. So that's it. I hope you find this useful. If you have any questions, please do get in touch with the local sales representative or technical support. Thank you very much.